So I've been ordered by the authorities to stop canning food on YouTube. As you know, Carolyn and I canned hundreds of jars of food, chicken, pork, just meat, beef, hamburger. I can't tell you what all we can. I originally started out with metal lids, but quickly learned that I love these Tadler lids. They're reusable. You can see that it's got two pieces here. It's got the rubber O-ring and then it's got the plastic lid. The rubber O-ring is good for about 10 uses, and then the plastic lid's good forever. I think we canned, I don't know, almost 400 jars of food. So what we would can is, like when we butchered our chickens, we would can the chickens. And then if we went to the store and they had a big sale on something, meat, some meat product, we could can that too. So we hot packed and cold packed lots of different items, but primarily chicken, because when you go to Save-A-Lot, they have these bags of chicken, 10-pound bags of chicken, frozen, thighs and legs for, well, about $4.90 a bag, so 49 cents a pound. Extremely cheap. Well, that price went up way up in the summer, went up to nearly $10 a bag. Well, recently, it just came back down to $4.90, and we got 3 bags of those. We didn't can that right away. As you may remember, we got a freezer. Now, we used to have this refrigerator, so this would only hold about 30 days worth of food. I say use, we still have it. It's not in use right now. Carolyn would buy hamburger or whatever she could buy and then grind it up in a meat grinder and then pack it into tight little patties, and then she would line up the freezer like a bookshelf, 2 rows. But anything else we got, we had to can. We just didn't have the room for it. Well, I learned that canning in the winter is so much easier than canning in the summer. Canning in the winter, you can put it out in the cooler and it can stay cold for as long as it's cold outside, and then when it starts to thaw out, then I can can it. I wasn't in a big rush in the wintertime, but summertime, boy, I mean, you're always in a rush. When we can chicken, we have to cook it, get it so it flakes off the bone, and I know the people are gonna tell me, you can can it on the bone. You can can it on the bone, but we don't. We would cook it, debone it, and then can it. Well, we're doing 30 pounds. We have 2 canners. Each of these canners hold 10 jars, so we get 20 jars. So that's about 20 pounds of meat. You lose 10 pounds in bone. Well, that's an all-day job. I mean, it takes all day because you got to cook it. So I get about 4 o'clock in the morning. I would cook the chicken for about 3 hours. Then we would debone it. Then we would can it. About 3 or 4 o'clock in the evening, it would start to wrap up. Now, when you cold pack, it's not near as bad because you don't have to cook it. All you got to do is put it in the jar, put it in the canner, and then as you're canning it, it's cooking as well. So we bought that chicken, and Carolyn said, well, let's just put that chicken in the freezer now that we have the freezer. We bought the freezer because we thought the refrigerator had went out on us. Now, I'm going to repeat myself. I know people don't like me repeating myself, but I have to, because when new viewers come in, they don't know what I'm talking about. And so they click out of the video because they have no idea what I'm talking about. So when we thought the little fridge went up, we went out and got the freezer. And boy, I mean, we just packed that thing as fast as we could. I think the first trip we got 80 pounds of food. And then the second trip, we went maybe 2 weeks later, and we filled it the rest of the way up. But we also remember we got those 3 bags of chicken. That bone takes so much room. Remember, Carolyn likes to grind up the meat, put it in little packages. So when we're talking full, this thing's full of meat that's tightly packed. Now, we also have 2 or 3 huge pork roasts in there. I think they're boneless even. We froze that, and what we'll do is we'll take the Sawzall, and I know a lot of people think that's gross, but you clean the Sawzall, and we have a blade that we specifically use just for cutting meat. And so when she's ready to cook that, we'll take the Sawzall, we'll cut off strips of meat up from it. Well, then the other day, we had to go into town. It was a family emergency, so we went into town to visit the family member. And while we were in town, we thought, well, we better just stop at the store and see if they got any sales or anything. Carolyn wanted to get some more bacon for sure. We were out of bacon. She loves cooking bacon with those eggs. They sell these boxes of 10 pounds of bacon at Save-A-Lot. Well, now all of a sudden, we don't have room for the chicken. That means we're going to have to can. Well, what we try to do is we try to thaw out the meat, the chicken, because it's frozen. Well, with it being so cold, it doesn't thaw out quickly. So you're always trying to judge how to do this. Well, there's just no way to judge it in the wintertime. So we took it out to the cooler and we just started to let it thaw. Well, then it shot up to 70 degrees yesterday and it thawed out instantly. Well, now we've got a problem, because we were going to can it tomorrow. But we can't do that because it's supposed to be snowing and raining. So it went to 70 degrees down to snowing and raining, possible tornadoes. I guess we could, don't get me wrong, we could. Now remember, we do all this outside. So weather influences some of the things we do, although we try to make the weather work for us, such as freezing our food outside when we can. And we've done that a lot. One of the things you have to remember is when you put thawed out meat in the freezer, your freezer will run 2 or 3 days without shutting off. So when you're on solar panels, at nighttime, the batteries are running that. Well, then we have to run the generator. We don't have enough batteries to run the freezer overnight. I know somebody's gonna say, get more batteries. At some point, you just say, you know what? Let's run the generator. People try to do cost analysis all the time and tell me to do cost analysis. And quite frankly, I think the cost of running the generator just isn't that bad. I'd only use a gallon of gas to run it overnight. I would say when it's in the teens, when the temperature is in the teens, that you can take your meat outside and it'll freeze overnight. Then you can bring it in and freeze it. So we try to get the weather to work with us. Well, this time it was just kind of an emergency. We got to can food in the snow and the rain. Well, the problem with those Coleman stoves, we use Coleman stoves, well, I guess any stove, is when it's windy, it doesn't get as hot. The wind's blowing that flame and cooling everything down. Well, when you're canning with these canners, you want a consistent temperature. Put the shields up on the Coleman cook stove, and I try to block the wind as much as possible. But when it's snowing and raining and nasty and water's blowing in, you don't want to cool those down. If you cool them down and the little thing stops, then you have to start over. It was just too dangerous to do that. Well, now we're going to have meat that's spoiled because it went up to 72 degrees yesterday. So we can't have the meat just sitting out there for days trying to figure out how to make this all work and stick it back in the freezer. It's too full. Now, if you want to see my canning videos, you can go to my channel, go to playlist, scroll down the playlist, and you'll see canning. And I show you everything that we've canned. Chicken, pork, ground beef, bacon, also with the Tadler lids. Now, I told you the freezer was too full to put the bags of chicken into because the bones take up so much room. Well, I told Carolyn I'm gonna have to cook the chicken no later than tomorrow in the middle of the rain and the snow and the cold temperatures and the wind. And then maybe what I could do, and we're theorizing, trying to figure out what we can do. Maybe we can put it in the jars, buy a bag of ice, and then put the jars in the cooler, let them sit overnight, or 2 days. I think you can get about 3 days after you cook it before it starts to spoil. So I was thinking maybe on Saturday, so this is Wednesday, maybe on Saturday I could start canning. That way the weather isn't snowing and windy and rainy. So she said, why don't you go ahead and cook it today? And I thought, boy, I mean, we're really pushing it if we're going to can it on Saturday. I don't want it to rot. So it spawned a conversation. After lots of discussion, she said, I don't want you canning it. So she's the authority that tells me how to do things. What we'll do is we'll debone the chicken. So cook it up, we'll debone it, and we'll put it in gallon bags, Ziploc bags. And then we put that into the freezer because we got enough room for that. Because again, you can pack it really tight. And I got to thinking about this. This is actually quite ingenious. Remember, we also feed the cat our chicken 2 times a day. So she gets regular food anytime she wants, a regular cat food. But then we give her that canned chicken 2 times a day. And so she goes through a jar of food about every 3 to 4 days. I don't like extending it out too far. Just in case you're curious, there she is. She is such a well-trained cat. She's going in to get fixed on, March 10th. I'm always opening jars of food for her. So I was thinking, if we freeze it, she could actually eat that first. I could just break off a hunk, let it thaw out, and for the next meal, it'll be ready for her. Now, what's so important about this is it's going to save us propane. Remember, it's cheaper for us to run the freezer than it is to run propane because we live on solar panels. If we put it in the freezer, no cost. But on propane, we would have to run the propane stove for about, I think 3 hours, roughly 3 hours on top of cooking the chicken. Now, obviously you have to cook the chicken. You don't have a choice. Now, we could cook the chicken down there on the burner with the wood pile, and we've done that before. But the problem with that is it's kind of breezy, and with it being wintertime and all the leaves on the ground and everything, you don't want that spark to get into the woods and catch everything on fire. So we try to be careful with that. And since this is an all-day project, you would get bored sitting there babysitting it all day watching it. So it's just easier to cook it on the propane. This takes 3 hours. Now, Carolyn said, why don't we just use one burner? We have 2 pots like this that we use. Normally we can put it on both of them. But she said, you know, we're just wasting water. All that broth is gonna go down in the ditch because we're not gonna can it. So let's not waste it. Which actually saved me more propane if you think about it. Because when you have to raise the temperature of the water, that takes propane to raise the temperature of the water. So if I had 2 pots there, I'd be raising the temperature of the water on both pots. But in this case, I only have to raise the temperature of the water once. Then we take all the chicken out on the first batch, put the chicken in, the second batch of chicken in, but the water's already hot. So I don't know if you can see it, but it's already starting to steam, and I only put that in there maybe 10 minutes ago. So instead of it having to be on the burner for 3 hours, I'm thinking an hour and a half to 2 hours is the most. Not only this is going to save me time because I don't have to use the pressure cooker, it's saving me propane. I don't have to use pressure cooker and propane, and I'm cutting off about an hour of cook time. When you're living off grid, you do have to think about, and this isn't a bad thing, but you do have to think about how you're going to manage your resources because you're limited on resources. When you turn on the water at your home, you have an endless supply of water. You can literally turn it on and it runs all day. I know it may cost you money, but if you put money aside, you got all the water you want. I don't. I got to fill the water tank with the well. That means I got to use propane to fill the water tank because the generator runs off propane. These tanks have to be filled up. I got to take them into town, get them filled out. So I have a limited supply of propane. When I'm running electric, anything electric, I have a limited supply. So when we fill the freezer up with thawed out food, I got to think about batteries. How much electric do I have? Am I going to have to run a generator? Is the sun out? So it was just easier to say, well, let's take in the cost of the generator, which is a gallon of gas, $2.88 for a gallon of gas, and add that onto our food costs. So we go to the store, we spend $200 a month on food. Start the generator, we add $2.88 to our cost of food. But now we have the freezer, we don't have to run the generator near as much because instead of going once a month, we may go every 3 or 4 months. See, it already started boiling over. And I literally just started this before I turned on the camera. So now I can turn it down. Now imagine this, if we'd have done this inside, all that mess would have been immediately cleaned up. Now you want to turn this down, obviously 1, so it doesn't boil over, but 2, so you can save propane. So just trying to save energy and resources. So if you can click this up next box, take you to a video where I was talking about the tiny house. So I hope I can inspire you to think ahead so you can live your dreams. Thanks for watching.